Welcome to this channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the United States of America and Canada, and about how we kind of have an addiction to cars and what that means. Well, if you flunked your history exam, you might not realize that cars haven't existed for millennia, but cities have. So how did we get here? Go back to places like ancient Rome, which is one of my favorite examples of ancient cities. And you'll notice that this city was not designed or built in the early 1900s when the automobile boom happened. It was built more than 2,000 years ago. And yet, not only does it still exist, the original city is not designed for cars. Areas have been retrofitted so that you can drive cars through it, but when Rome was brand new, and for more than 90% of its existence, cars were not a thing in Rome. What did people do? People walked. That's it. So let's talk about some early forms of traveling. Very, very simple traveling. Let's talk about just within a city itself. As time went on, we found more efficient and effective ways of building cities and society, and so we found out horsepower. Well, quite literally, riding horses to get around the city. So this was another way people got around, and so people needed a place to keep their horses, people needed to feed their horses, and people needed to make sure that they were healthy so that they could get around. Because not everyone wanted to walk from one end of town to the other to go visit whatever you needed to do. If you didn't have to walk it, people were probably not going to walk it, and so you could take a horse. But then again, as centuries went on and as the 1800s happened, we discovered electrification, and if we wanted to travel long distances, then we made horse cars that were electric, and thus the streetcar was born. And so electric streetcars started dotting cities all the way around the world, starting around the 1890s and into the early 1900s. And this is how people traveled in the city. Streetcars. Really, once we discovered the magic of railroads, you could get anywhere you wanted to in a way more effective way than you could on horse or by foot. So then, interurban railways started to exist, or other steam railways and long-distance railways began to be built. And this is how we've ended up where we are today, with still large swaths of the US, Canada, really anywhere, connected by rail. We still have the infrastructure here, but we just mostly use it for freight. But that's kind of beside the point of this video. The basic thing is, though, that I'm trying to say, is people discovered the magic of rail travel to actually travel between cities. And we're talking close distance, long distance, or all the way across a continent. So now I'd like to get into something that a lot of the world did at one time, but I am going to give it a very US-specific look. You've all probably heard of the American Dream and what it was. So we're going to talk about the era pretty much right after World War II. We're going to talk about 1940s through the 1960s. During this time, there was a lot of change between, if you were to compare 1950 to the year 1850, a lot had changed at this time, including the way we traveled. Cars, trucks, and just generally automobiles began to take over the world. Everywhere began to use them. And so the American dream sort of changed and formed into what it is today. Every family would own a house in the suburbs. They would buy the house outright, a single-family home with a large front lawn, a large backyard, a two-car garage, and everybody would have a car, and they would use that car to get around. So everybody would own a home, they'd have a car, and they'd start a family in that home. Now, of course, the American dream was designed, this idea of owning a home in the suburbs and owning a car is all kind of if you're rich enough. If you're unfortunate enough to be in the poor, then you're just left to everything else. You're probably going to be living on the street, or you might be living in a very not great home. Maybe an old townhouse that was built in the 1890s or something. And yeah, no, not ideal. So there was a very large divide. But this was also while segregation was still a thing, and I'm not really going to be touching on those issues here, but I just want to get familiar with the time period we're talking about. So now we must answer this question about cities in North America, because yes, this absolutely includes most Canadian cities. What are cities designed for? Well, it's pretty easy to answer this question, because what do you see absolutely everywhere? That's right, cars. But what don't you see everywhere? People. Well, at least especially in the suburbs. So that means that cities are not designed for people, cities are designed for cars. But they didn't always used to be this way, as I stated earlier. Cities were designed for the people, and then they were bulldozed for the car, they were converted for use by the car, and everything that was once pedestrian infrastructure, or maybe pedestrian and horse car infrastructure, has been converted to cars, and lots and lots and lots of them, with large parking lots, and lots, just C-A-R-S, cars, absolutely everywhere. And that is what North American society has become. This happened worldwide, but here in North America, we are still stuck in our ways about being addicted to cars. So now we got to talk about why this is not necessarily a good thing. Alright, let's talk about how it all looks. So I want you to imagine you take a perfectly good city with some large buildings, and it's dense, it's walkable, and people are out walking all the time. And then you just practically bomb it. You destroy lots of buildings, or demolish lots of buildings, and in its place you put a parking lot. Well, that just turned these cool buildings that were built in the 1880s up until the really mid-1900s, and you've just wasted them away so that you can park some air-conditioned, climate-controlled metal boxes. That space that's being used to park those cars is very valuable, especially when you do this whole destroy a building so that you can put a parking lot there. That's valuable real estate that you've just destroyed and are just parking cars in. It's incredibly wasteful. And what happens when this parking lot fills up? Well, then drivers are going to continue driving around until they find a place to park, and they've wasted a lot of time, a lot of gas, they're polluting the air, all so that they can find a place to park. This is not great. Also, high density. So because these nice cities and these nice buildings within these cities have been partially demolished just so that we can park cars in it, that's not great from a financial standpoint. Higher density will always make more money. If you look at special graphs or 3D models of cities, the areas of the cities which make the most amount of money are the highest densities. And so when you convert some of this high density land to parking some vehicles, you are purposefully making your city make less money, which is bad in every way. Having commercial spaces of any kind, restaurants, clothing stores, bookstores, cafes, bars, pubs, whatever, literally anything at all, is better than just parking a car. And free parking is even worse. Because at least when you have paid for parking, number one, that means that the city is actually making a little bit of money rather than just offering free parking and no money at all. And number two, it might discourage people from driving into the city center when they know that not only do they have to pay, but there's not really going to be a lot of places to park. And so that encourages other modes such as transit. Or if you live within the area, then you could probably get away with just biking. Or if you're going short distances, just walk if possible. You will thank yourself later. Getting out there and getting your exercise by walking is a good thing. You ever wonder why Americans are so fat? Well, we kind of have the worst of the worst. So we have a McDonald's on every corner. Maybe not as much as Starbucks, but pretty close. McDonald's or fast food joints absolutely everywhere. Then you have drive-thrus which cater toward the car drivers. So now you don't even have to exit your car to get your fast food. Then you drive all the way to wherever you're going to eat it, and then you eat your fast food. Nowhere in here are we getting up and exercising, walking somewhere, biking somewhere. None of that. You're just in your car. That is the definition of a sedentary lifestyle, and it is very, very good idea to try and avoid that. Last point I'll bring up about this whole car-infested infrastructure and why it's so terrible. Here in the US, you are more or less under house arrest until you're aged 16 because we design suburbs terribly. They don't have sidewalks, they don't have bike paths. It is just a sea of endless housing. And the only way to exit the neighborhood is pretty much to drive, because many neighborhoods are large and have nothing in them. It is just houses. There's nothing to walk to. There might be a school, there might be a park, but there isn't going to be that corner store that you could just walk to when you come home. There isn't going to be that favorite pub on the corner of your street. There isn't going to be a Target right there in the neighborhood. There isn't going to be a Best Buy when you need a new TV or something. No, it's just housing. You want to get to all of those, you got to hop in your car, go drive to this massive 2-acre large parking lot, go into the store, and then drive all the way back. Again, getting zero exercise in the process and just adding stress to your life. And you have to have a driver's license, meaning you gotta be more than 16 years old. And seriously, you're under house arrest until age 16. You want to go visit a friend's house? Well, too bad. You're either going to have your parents drive you, or you better have the luxury of having some sort of transit option near your house. Which, let's face it, most North American suburbia doesn't really have. And even the places that do, oh, this bus only runs 5 times a day, or this train's really far away, or we find some way to screw it up. So now I'd like to talk about what urbanism is, and a little bit about urban planning and that sort of thing. So again, it's no secret that we've really kind of screwed up our cities since we began to retrofit them for the car. So now our cities are designed for the car rather than for the people that live within that city. And it's quite apparent with all the car infrastructure that we have. So urbanism is sort of here, let's have some better density options. Let's remove some on-street parking and instead put a 2-way protected bike path through here. That way more people bike to our destination. Let's explain to the public why removing on-street parking is actually an okay thing to do. And, you know, you get people that'll freak out about, but where am I going to park? I might do a separate video on parking that includes on-street parking and what exactly that means. But in general, urbanism just kind of means advocating for dense areas. It doesn't have to be just the city center. Neighborhoods can be dense too. The more housing there is in the same amount of space, the more money you'll make, because there's more houses that could potentially be sold. Instead of each home getting a huge front yard that nobody uses, why do homes need a massive front yard? A massive backyard and having 200 feet between your neighbors? Yeah, sure, maybe that's comfortable, but that is a terrible use of space. You can only fit so many people in that space. Rather than if it were denser, I don't mean that everywhere should be townhouses that are stuck together or 20-story apartment towers on every block of every street of every corner ever. That's not what the urbanism is. It's just advocating for denser areas so that cities can make more money, and it's so that it just is better. Everything is more walkable. So that's another huge point of urbanism, is walkability. You should not be forced into owning a car just to partake in society. Anything in society. You should not be forced to own a car to participate. You can walk, you can bike, and you can take transit. That is a good neighborhood right there. If your neighborhood is walkable, bikeable, and transitable, that's a good thing. Urbanism also sort of works against cars. Not to the extent that, you know, all cars everywhere are gone, but it definitely is one of those, whoa, we have too many cars, we need to reduce pollution, and we need to realize that cars are terrible in a few ways and okay in others. But using them as your one and only way of transporting absolutely everything everywhere is not good and never will be. You should either rent or buy a home for you to live in, and you shouldn't be required to have another large chunk of money per month just going to owning a car, nonetheless multiple cars. A house payment's expensive enough. If you could imagine just living somewhere that you want, but that might be too expensive for you, but you can ditch all the car payments per month, you might actually be able to live in something more expensive. Now, I know I can hear inside your head saying, but what? I might need my car. What if I need a car? Well, car renting is a thing. You can always rent a car. Renting a car will always be cheaper than having to own a car and pay for it month by month, and then by the time you've paid off your car, it's depreciated in value, and now you can't sell it for as much as you bought it for. You never will be able to do that. Cars value just, the value of your car drops the moment you start it up and the moment it drives off of that lot. There's nothing you can do about it. So it's almost like you're shooting yourself in the foot. So I've discovered lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of YouTube channels that have talked about this sort of thing, and it has opened my eyes more than I ever thought possible. So I'd like to talk about that. The first channel is, of course, transit related, because that's what this YouTube channel is all about, and so that's RM Transit. There have been some excellent videos that he's done talking about walkability and about transit-oriented infrastructure and how that doesn't just benefit transit riders, it benefits everybody that lives in the area. But then I've discovered some other channels like City Beautiful. That was the next one I had watched a couple videos from. That one didn't really open my eyes too much about car-related infrastructure, but then I discovered Alan Fisher, aka the Armchair Urbanist, but his YouTube channel is called Alan Fisher. I unfortunately can't remember the very first video I watched from that channel anymore, but there are some really good videos on there, and that one really opened my eyes, and this was right around the turn of the new year for me, so I've had quite a few months to, you know, let this kind of sink in. So, yeah, he's made a lot of videos talking about why trains are such an effective way of moving people, and about how cars are not. Having fewer high-capacity vehicles, like trains, that can transport you into the city, versus a ton of low-capacity vehicles, all one bumper to bumper to bumper to bumper, that is definitely a high difference of efficiency right there, which I'll talk about shortly. Then I discovered Not Just Bikes. And I think Not Just Bikes is one of the best channels for understanding it from a different point of view, because he used to live in a city near Toronto, Canada, which is known for having excellent transit and for being pretty walkable so long as you live in downtown or off of one of its many streetcar lines. But all the surrounding cities, or many of them, not so much. And so he got sort of fed up with it. There's a long story to this, but he now lives in the Netherlands. Now, oddly, I already am sort of familiar with the Netherlands. Not that I've ever been there, but I've been subscribed to a YouTube channel for several years, probably around the time COVID started, maybe even slightly before, called HTM 5000, where you can just watch the tram lines of The Hague in the Netherlands. It also connects to some other cities like Delft. And I thought this channel was really cool, and I thought the tram lines were really cool, and so I've watched a lot of the videos on that channel, and I'm still subscribed to it today. And so I'm already kind of familiar with how the Netherlands looks, about how transit operates, and about how cars operate. Because it's very different. The US method of building roads, highways, streets are all vastly different from how it's done in the Netherlands or other parts throughout the world. So watching a video from Not Just Bikes and knowing that he lives in the Netherlands now is pretty interesting and is pretty eye-opening. And there's one other channel I'd like to mention. There are quite a few others as well, but I'd like to also mention City Nerd. Not the same thing as City Beautiful. City Nerd. He uploads weekly videos about a lot of different topics, including roads, highways, and how they're not a great use of land. But he'll also travel to these places all over the world. He's been in Europe for a really long time, and it's, again, pretty eye-opening. I think it's pretty interesting because he lived in Portland for over 20 years and has actually worked on several projects in the Portland area, which is very cool to see. So, props to you. So I'd like to briefly touch on walkable neighborhoods and what it means to be walkable. So, again, if you have 6 lanes as your street and you have 3 car lanes in each direction, you have maybe a white painted line on the side and a little sidewalk maybe on one side. Yeah, no, that is clearly geared toward car drivers. Bikers are not welcome. Walkers are not welcome. I mean, sure, you've built the infrastructure for it, but it's not safe. Nobody's going to want to use that. A walkable area would be to take that same amount of space and to instead have 1 lane of traffic per direction. You would have nice wide sidewalks, and you would have at least 1 set of 2-way biking infrastructure, separate from the sidewalk and from the road. Everything is fully separate, so you have a road, a bikeway, and a sidewalk. That's a much better use of land, but it can get even better. You can also add tram tracks, or what we'd be more likely to call streetcar tracks or light rail tracks, along the side of that road, so that you can actually have rail transit, a little bit of cars, a little bit of bikes, and a little bit of sidewalk. That way, people would be more inclined to actually use the system and to actually walk in the area or bike in the area. Again, if you build it, they will come. I'd like to show you some examples of this. I haven't gone and filmed the one I've been wanting to film for a while, but I have filmed a local example to me, and that is South Waterfront. The South Waterfront area of Portland is really, really cool. Now, maybe you wouldn't call this a neighborhood, but it is certainly a dense development that has lots of businesses. It has a park. It's right off of a streetcar line, right off the river, and it's within walking distance of the Tillicum Crossing, which is probably the coolest bridge in North America. Not only just for its looks, but because this bridge has all modes except for cars. Personal vehicles are not allowed on this bridge, but everything else is. And that, my friend, is what we should be striving for. Now, this might be a statement that might ruffle some feathers, so just be warned of that. But I'd like to talk about essential services. Firstly, what is an essential service? When you think of an essential service in a city, the first thing that might come to mind is the fire department, or maybe ambulances, or police, maybe delivery services, or food services, food carts, transit services, taxis, Uber, Lyft, which are sort of taxi-like. These are essential services within a city. A city can't really function without them. So now let's think of something. What about when you drive your car? If you drive your car and you get stuck behind a bus, or you get stuck behind a delivery truck, or you get stuck behind whatever. Whose fault is it? I mean, I wouldn't really say it's somebody's fault, but who is getting in the way of who? If you're driving your car, you're clearly going to say, man, these buses always get in the way. I wish none of these buses exist. That way I could just drive to my destination faster without any of these obstacles. And that, my friend, right there is what car brain US or Canadian citizen likely thinks. It's just how we think here. We don't get, it's either all for the car or nothing at all. If God forbid you make some sort of infrastructure not for the car, then that's an insult to the US or Canada, and nobody talks about it. So every time you drive down a street or a road or whatever, and you get stuck behind a bus that's pulled over to the curb serving passengers, before you just gun the accelerator pedal and drive 90 miles an hour to try and make some statement, think about this for a second. That bus is not getting in your way. And maybe you're not getting into their way, but cars in general, personal vehicles, people that don't have to drive on this road, people who are locked into the mentality of that they must own a car in order to survive, because that's just how we've built neighborhoods here, maybe you're the one that's getting in the way of the bus. If you have tons of cars, and the bus is sitting in the back of this line of 20 cars, and none of these people actually really have to drive, but they've been more or less conditioned to drive their whole life because it's just what they see around them, and that's just how they grew up. You might want to ask yourself that. This bus doesn't have to be back here. This bus could be at the front of the line of traffic, which allows the buses to move faster because it's less likely that they'll be stuck behind long lines of cars. So the buses can move at their optimal speed without anything getting in their way. And when you think of police or medical, fire, they're of course traveling at high speed, but they're also having to dodge lots of obstacles, lots of cars that get in the way. So you might want to think about that if you're just driving just for the heck of it. Now, I'm not saying that you should never go for a Sunday drive in the middle of a rural country road. If it's something you enjoy, well, I'm not trying to stop you from that. But if you're driving in a dense, urbanized area and you don't have to, you might want to think twice. You may want to walk it if possible, or just take transit through the area. Take in your surroundings. You can do literally anything other than focusing on driving, so that removes lots of stress. You can actually get work done on your laptop if you're on a bus or a train for a while. There's a lot of benefits here that I think people don't realize. Being stuck behind the wheel in congested traffic, anxiously waiting to go home, that's not healthy. So what does it mean to go car-free or car-light? Because some areas are not, it's really not possible to get where you want to completely car-free, and you might already have a car that's been paid off or whatever, and so you might want to hold on to your car for a while. I personally would suggest, if you want to live the way I would live, it's up to everybody what they want to do, but you got to think of this from several points of view. I would say if you can limit the amount of times you drive your own personal vehicle, give it a try. Try walking through your neighborhood. See what sights you may have never noticed because you're always driving 25 miles an hour down the street and you end up missing all this because you're not looking at it. Or maybe try biking. If you have biking infrastructure near you and you know how to ride a bike, then give it a try. Or if you have transit options in your area, give that a try too. There's nothing wrong with giving it a try. If you absolutely hate it, then go back to driving a car, but when you realize actually walking in the outdoors and going where you want to go on foot or just on your own time is great, and not being confined in your own vehicle, stuck in traffic, adding emissions into the atmosphere, well, that's a win-win in my book. So let's talk a little bit about efficiency and sustainability. Two big words that are hugely important. So, efficiency. It is far, far more space efficient to have people go into a train or a bus than to have each one of those passengers drive their own vehicle. Here's the deal. There have been pictures before of here's how many people can fit in cars on this stretch of road, and here's all of those people on one bus. One bus and no other cars. It will always be far more space efficient to travel that way. And you'll always get people on Twitter who say, yeah, but this is the maximum example of everybody being crush-loaded into a bus and all the people driving their cars, just one person per car. But you gotta ask yourself, during commuting hours, that's kinda what's happening. Most people who commute to work are just they themselves commuting to work. It's just, they're not, far less people carpool or go with HOV or anything like that. Far more people just travel by themselves in their own car, while the other 4 seats in their car remain completely empty. And cars are not some tiny one-person vehicle that you can drive. They're large. Compare that to a bike. Bikes take up hardly any room. And a bus has a little under 40 seats in it, and with all of those full, you can still have more people standing, and there's just one driver. Then you can have even higher efficiency with trains. Trains have 2 advantages. Number 1, they're longer than buses, or at least they really should be. So having lots of passengers on one train, which often happens during commuting times, that is a far more efficient way. Almost all of those people would otherwise be traveling solo in their own car, adding to congestion. Here's a reminder. You are not stuck in congestion when you think you're stuck in congestion. You are the congestion. Every time you choose to drive, you add to that. So, hopping on a train is one of the most effective ways of bypassing congestion, which frees up the roadway for other modes of travel, including those essential services I talked about earlier. But the other major benefit of rail travel is energy efficiency. Many trains are already electric, whereas buses are only just now beginning to be battery electric, which is a quite intensive manufacturing process. Trains have been electric for more than a century, and we've already perfected it long ago, so there's nothing wrong with that technology currently. So if you travel by electric train, well, it's more energy efficient that way too. And also, rolling resistance. I gotta talk about rolling resistance. I don't remember if I've mentioned it before, because this is my second time having to record this video because the last one turned out to be a disaster, but rolling resistance is basically, in basic terms, the amount of energy required to roll a vehicle forward, to actually get it to move. Now, if you have rubber tires, that is quite high rolling resistance because rubber has lots of friction, but trains are steel wheels on steel rails. There's not a whole lot of friction there. It is far more energy efficient to move a train than a bus, or a car, or a truck, or a dirt bike. It doesn't matter. Trains are steel wheels on steel rails, the most energy efficient way of moving large crowds of people, which transit is incredibly good at doing. So now, this has all sort of set up the urbanism. I'm going to change my channel to Urbanism 101. That's a joke, no I'm not. But this is sort of an introduction for next week's video. So we're gonna go through some little thought experiment next week, and I'm going to talk about what would happen if you tried to design a city from scratch that more or less discourages the use of personal cars and personal automobiles. So join me next week for that, and I'll see you next time.